You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
It is a period of relative peace and prosperity in the galaxy. We're some 100 years from the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire. Welcome to Fantha Tracks Reaction Chat for episode 3 of The Acolyte, entitled Destiny. My name's Mark, one of your co-hosts, and joining me this week on, let's just call it our own ascension ceremony, as it were, it's my brother in the Force, Mr. Mark Newbold. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
I'm very well, mate, and I'm very much looking forward to talking about this episode because, spoiler alert, I thought it was fascinating.
I think that is a good way to refer to this episode. I think fascinating is definitely one that it will probably be used by, I think, many people in social media, hopefully.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, the whole episode is set, 16 years before the present day in the Acolyte. So
Yeah.
we basically flash back, and as to, I think a lot of people had said, and I think we'd even said in last week's reaction chat, whilst Carrie-Anne Moss's character Indira gets dispatched in the first 5 minutes, it wasn't going to be the last of her. And as we can see now, that she is very pivotal and central to the whole story behind May and Osha. So this episode is kind of, it's set on Brendok, the planet where Osha and May are apparently born. And it's quite an interesting kind of way to, I think, kick off. We're not even like halfway through the season. So we're going to get, I think, a lot more of these kind of flashbacks over the course of the next 5 or 6 episodes, I reckon.
I think we need to because the mystery has been set. And as we said on the last episode, we now know the 2 girls are twins and it's not the same person. That was sorted out quickly. We now know the mission that May's on to take out the Jedi, but now we're learning why. So for a brand new show that's in the new era, that can't lean on established characters, that seems to be striking out to mostly new planets. We've seen Coruscant, obviously, slightly adjusted for its time, but, basically it's Coruscant. But everything else is new for the most part. Karlak, I think, has been around in fiction for a while, but to do something like this, to have those 2 opening episodes on the same day and then do this, which is a bold sweep back with, again, brand new characters, to do that is, I think, quite ballsy. So, yeah, I can see how some people might be a bit twitchy about it because it is all so fresh and it's so new. And obviously, it's mostly female-led in the cast, very few exceptions to that, apart from when the Jedi turn up. But again, it's sort of part of lore that we've seen in Star Wars before. Witches are established. They're established in the Clone Wars. Rokur Gepta in the Lando books was basically a male witch, was like a sorcerer, similar type of thing, using powers that you would associate with the Force. And I think that's been fleshed out more in the intervening years. In Ahsoka, of course, with the Night Sisters. So witches in Star Wars are not a new thing. But to do what these did, to box themselves off, to do what Luke did basically on Acto and just lock themselves away from the rest of the galaxy just to quietly live their lives, and to tell that story again was quite brave, I thought.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, as you say, I think if you were to have only seen the Star Wars saga movies, you're going to get a very kind of sharp shift, kind of swift kind of surprise, really, to what is going on. Because suddenly, like, the saga films especially are very much a binary kind of notion of good versus evil, light versus dark.
Very.
So then, to kind of insect this, what everybody has really wanted for a long time, which is these grey Jedi, as it were. But, we know that Jedi aren't grey. It just means that basically...
Morally grey.
Morally grey, yeah. But also, it's down to how the intent of the Force is being used. Are you using it to corrupt? Are you using it for selfish gains and stuff like that? So therefore it becomes more about that. But this, again, they seem to have their own conversation with the Force. They kind of discuss it in ways of like, with threads and again, it's always based around this notion of destiny as well. So it's based around like, your destiny is kind of tied to you and stuff like that. And like Osha and May's destinies are tied and that. And it's very interesting just seeing this kind of binary nature in this series, especially kind of be explored differently. We kind of have a perspective from the Witches that the Jedi are inherently bad in this episode. And I think that's quite clear, and even down to the fact that, the Jedi kind of agree, like they kind of come in and they kind of say, you can't be training children. And it's like, and then the mother says, well, hang on a sec, we're not part of the Republic. Who are you to say that we can't train our children? Now, they don't even know how these children were brought about, which is an interesting kind of point to this whole episode anyway.
Yeah.
But it's just, again, we kind of started to get these hints in the first two episodes of actually, does the galaxy in itself, do everybody perceive a Jedi as good, or are we now seeing that actually not everybody agrees that the Jedi are doing things for the right reasons?
We saw that in phase 2 of the Horror Republic, didn't we? When we took that step back, and you start to see, I think it was the Path of the Open Hand and groups like that other Force groups, and there were others all sort of congregating on Jeddah. And I think it's very interesting now, and just as we chew through the episode, just the thought that there are these other Jedi sects, if you like, the Force sects, should say Force sects, not Jedi sects, Force sects, who don't necessarily. I mean, Mother Anastasia basically says some. I think I wrote the quote down here. Some call it the Force. Basically that's not what they refer to it as, this power, but that's basically what the Jedi have framed it as, and they've given it its own yin and yang and all this to sort of protect the access to it, really. So when they turn up on Brendok, this world that's locked itself off, to come and essentially take the twins, or take certainly the one that they're aware of, and then the other, does feel from, and it's all what Obi-Wan said in A New Hope, isn't it? Certain point of view, you're watching it from the witch's point of view, and of course they've just turned up to take their kids, and as we learn, the most interesting element I found of all of it really was the fact that, again, in the same way that Shmi had Anakin with no father, you learn that Mother Anastasia, helped bring about with Qual, I think the lady's name was.
Yeah, there's Brack.
Yeah, exactly. Which is kind of ironic. That brought the twins about as well. So you're thinking, well, is this one of the dyad situations? Is it, there's lots of things you think about, but I just couldn't help straight away just pitching right forward to the prequel trilogy and thinking, about the same age Anakin gets put in front of the council. They know that Qui-Gon will have told them that there's no father. So, this kid's special,
virgins, you say.
Exactly. And they turn the kid down. But, just the pressure of the situation means that they kind of have to pivot a little bit. And in this era, of course, this is 100 years essentially before that. So are the errors of Phantom Menace or the decisions in Phantom Menace, clearly what's happening here retroactively is part of that decision-making process.
Hello, this is Mark Thompson. I narrate a bunch of the Star Wars audiobooks, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Do or do not. There is no try.
I think George kind of alludes to this really, when he talks about prequels and stuff, and I think even Dave Filoni mentions it. It's like, historically, history has this tendency to repeat itself on one level or another. Like, it only takes a couple of generation gap for the next generation to make the same mistakes in different ways, sometimes not necessarily as bad and sometimes like devastatingly worse. And I thought it was quite interesting that the whole testing process was basically the same as what Qui-Gon does.
With the paddle and the
Well, Torben takes the blood, so we're guessing at that point, the Jedi are aware of the midichlorians and their kind of like symbiosis kind of relationship, so therefore they're testing for strength for midichlorians in the blood. And then, like you said, you've got the paddle, and you've got was it a Lothcat, and I don't know, like
Cloud City, didn't it? That sort of
exactly
thing, yeah.
And you kind of go, well, that's kind of obviously a a nod and a flashback, but also it kind of shows that, you know, the traditions that we see in Phantom Menace are, you know, eons old. And I guess it's that whole notion of, you know, either whatever we get to the end of this season, you know, the Jedi don't learn from it because they carry on making the same dumb mistakes for the next 100 years, you know. So, but I think the biggest difference there is, and again, we don't necessarily know, like, the exact, you know, means and hows that Anakin came about, other than the fact that Shmi woke up one morning and she was basically pregnant. And is like, you know, was that, you know, we kind of start to get hints that maybe it was Plagueis and Palpatine kind of doing stuff in the background, but it's never been really confirmed.
No, not
now
really.
We kind of have this much more explicit, you know, conversation between the two mothers, and it's like, you know, it sounds like they've corrupted the Force to bring these two kids about. And what was quite interesting, and obviously very, you know, they made it very obvious that all through this episode, like when there's the night, you've got those two twin moons, which is like the orange and teal kind of like
from the logo.
Of the logo, well, exactly, of the logo as well. So it's all, you know, it's all connected. And again, so it's, you know, it's a Bogan and the Ashlar, it's like dark as the moon and the sun, yada yada yada. And I think clearly Leslie Headland's kind of set out to really show two very different personalities. You've got May, who's very kind of like headstrong and forceful, you know, like even in the class, she's the one who's pushing back, and Osha's kind of like being protected by her, almost kind of standing behind her. So it's like, you know, as a twin, I know what it's like. You know, there's always one twin who is slightly more like, you know, get up and go, and the other one's slightly more reserved, and it's kind of the same here.
Totally.
Now, when it comes to me and my brother, I'm not going to say which one's good and which one's bad and which one started with fires when we were younger, but but yeah, you know, for me, obviously, that's quite interesting to see that kind of that parallel actually like displayed on screen. And I think actually, I'm hoping anyway that the series so far has started to show a lot of you know, a lot greater representation for, like, you know, for minorities and that we haven't seen in Star Wars. I mean, there is that slight kind of, in that nice Star Wars subtle way, that, like, you know, the two mothers clearly aren't just kind of like, you know, the heads of the cult. They seem to be like in a relationship, and there's a nice bit of affection there. So that's good to see that on screen. But also, like when the girls have been prepared for the Ascension ceremony, you have the older, darker skinned kind of witches. They're also doing the braiding and stuff, and that's kind of one of those things that is, you know, that's you know, tied to like African kind of traditions and stuff like that. And so I thought that was really nice to see. And just on that note, the overall kind of costumes in this episode, I just thought were just stunning. I mean, especially the two mothers, kind of like fabrics and the hair and stuff. I thought was just like, again, it's the next kind of like iteration of seeing different things in Star Wars that actually you haven't seen before. And I think we just have to start to get, you know, used to being a little bit uncomfortable by some of these things, you know, if you're of a certain kind of age and disposition, I think.
Totally, yeah. And there's been already today loads of nibbling and whining and blah blah blah, and it's just very boring. I find very boring when there's so much to drill into. A quote from Revenge of the Sith came to mind as I was watching it. The dark side is a pathway to some abilities many consider to be unnatural, and I think Mother Anastasia knows that she has kind of perverted the Force to create these children, because the way that they've locked themselves away, there's no access to probably any other way of continuing their bloodline, if you want to put it that way. Maybe that's not an option, or maybe there's more to her than we realized. May is more like her mother than Osha is. We don't know quite yet. You'd look at it on the face of it now when Anastasia says to Osha, as you said earlier, you've got to follow your destiny. You know, this is what your heart tells you. It's very much what Shmi says to Anakin. You know,
it did ring to your heart. Similar. Yeah, exactly. You know?
And so to be in a situation like that, it's a terrible choice for Osha. And of course, she, as you said, I mean, I watched it with Ruth. Ruth's a twin, so she was picking out all the stuff you just said, very similar. Oh, by the way, I love your JJ lens flare. It looks really cool.
cool.
Really cool, really cool. And so she was picking up a lot of the stuff, and she really enjoyed the episode for that reason. That was what she was digging into, the similarities and the differences, and the way that even though you're essentially two kids from the same egg sort of thing, that you can be very yin and yang and very different in your perspectives. So for Osha to be the one that goes away, as we see at the beginning of the episode with that little translucent butterfly character, and she just pauses it and then lets it go, and then May comes in and she's holding it, and she's got that sort of look in her eyes, the very similar look that she had when she started the fire later on. You can tell that, as you said, which one started the fire when you were kids. Well, clearly we know May's the fire starter, but Osha kind of breaks her heart, doesn't she? They're not they're not the twins, they're the only two kids there, but they're not as unified as May clearly thinks that they are.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think that's the thing. It's possibly that sudden realization that your twin sister doesn't want exactly the same things as you, and that's, to be fair, that's what happens as you get older. One of you goes into like liking heavy metal, and the other one can't stand it's into house and trance and stuff like that. It's just it's one of those weird kind of things that kind of happens. And May seems to be very happy to stay with the coven in that really cool kind of mountain volcanic kind of like.
It was a good design, wasn't it?
Yeah, I thought that's really cool. Yeah. And obviously Osha's like, there's more to the galaxy than this, and I kind of want to explore it. So it's that in itself is a fairly classic kind of tropey story, which is a good kind of like foundation to build the rest of this show on. As a young, as an older teenager, I spent my youth kind of watching stuff like Charmed and Three Sisters and that, and so I quite enjoy kind of the witchy coven-y type kind of.
I was a Buffy guy. I was nuts about Buffy, and I was pushing 30 when Buffy started. So I love that whole aesthetic and vibe, and all that stuff is great. So I'm happy to have it in Star Wars.
I think so. It kind of works, and that's that's what we said at the beginning, isn't it? Like there's so much more to force usage and that, and and again, it's like even that first opening shot with like the drone shot, basically, where it just kind of says like Bodok and 16 years later, man. You notice there's like the stones and stuff, and it's like, well, that's very similar to the stones that they saw, that they use as a gate to the other galaxy in Ahsoka. And it all starts, they're using logical real world references, the like Stonehenge amount, was it used to commune with nature? Was it used as an astronomical kind of calendar, or was it there as just a ceremonial kind of thing, an altar, as it were, and as we see later on, they have this kind of ascension ceremony.
Well, that's a brilliant point, really, because you think of the galaxy, there's going to be cycles, there's going to be iterations, if you like. Everyone thinks of Anakin as the chosen one. He's only the chosen one of that generation. There's nothing to say. Palpatine says it in Rise of Skywalker, there hasn't been a dyad in generations. Depends on what your delineation of a generation is, really. How long's a generation? Is it 100 years? Is it 30 years? What do you consider a generation? I'm not quite sure of what the official, and would it be the same in the Star Wars galaxy anyway? But nevertheless, there's been wars, and there's been peace, and there's been dark ages like we've had here, so the galaxy cycles. So you saying that, it's a really good observation, because I spotted them, but I didn't really think too hard about what they might be.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
There's every chance that on Brendok in the past, before the witches got there was a Jedi temple there at some point, because it feels like there was so many Jedi temples that have just either been closed. Living Force, John Jackson Miller's recent book, is brilliant, detailing the closing down essentially of one of these temples as the galaxy, or the Jedi, really just retract back to Coruscant as its core base, and just pop around the galaxy from there, because goodness knows they've made hyperspace travel so easy now. Why was there ever the need to have a Jedi temple anywhere when you can travel from one side of the galaxy to the other in about 10 minutes seemingly? But that's a gripe aside of this. So I like that observation that there's other stuff there, and they've just kind of picked up this, because Master Inara says it, doesn't she? Indara rather says it, well, we thought this place was deserted, and that kind of doesn't really ring true, does it? I think they all see through that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's from somebody who I think has always, I guess, championed the Jedi. It is slightly uncomfortable watching when you're kind of like, hang on a sec, actually, yeah, that's utter nonsense. It just, I mean, obviously, I don't think we really know why they were there as such. I mean, I know, I mean, because it's odd because like they clearly got a bit of a camp going on, so they must be there for something. So whether or not like they've been asked to track down or they've heard reports of his kids or something, because that's the thing. Those that Witches Coven wasn't just made up of like one ethnicity. You had Twi'leks and Zabrak and that. So it's clearly it's wanderers who have kind of come together and sort out like the coven and that. And
so do you think then on that point, do you think the Jedi got wind of this coven because they kind of seem sort of familiar with it, or do you think because there's 4 of them, do you think they were just in that sector or in that system and they're all capable, they could have all gone off and looked for Jedi? Padawan?
4 Jedi, like 4 Jedi in
3 Jedi and a Padawan, wasn't it?
Yeah, 3 Jedi and a Padawan seems like a bit of an overkill because let's be fair, normally what we get in the books and in the films and stuff, it's like Master and Padawan go and sort out a local dispute or something, then everything kicks off. So to have 3 plus, let's say 3.5, or you could say 4 because Kalnaka is pretty tall.
Yeah, that's true.
You kind of go, well, hang on a sec. So they're clearly expecting like they're going to need backup or trouble or something. So maybe again, it's just one of those things. They're troubled by this sect, this coven, or they've heard.
You think they're threatened by it? Do you think they're threatened?
I think so, and I think this is this thing, isn't it? I think they kind of altruistically think that actually anybody who isn't a Jedi and isn't following their teachings on the Force
is a Sith.
Potentially, well, not necessarily a Sith, but it's actually they run the risk of slipping to the dark side because they're not managed properly. You know, so that's what it kind of comes down to. So we don't know what they're being taught, we don't know what they're being told and stuff. And from maybe from the Jedi's experience, again, we know what kind of happens that managed kind of like Force users eventually will cause a lot of harm and distress to the galaxy. So we're almost like proactively kind of going around and nipping out the bad buds and stuff. And
because we do think they were the first, don't we? I mean, I think the James Mangold film is pretty much going to tell you, well, that's an assumption, isn't it? Of course, we're assuming the Jedi were the first to access or be aware of the Force. Maybe we'll learn in that film that it was another. Well, I mean, the Jedi probably won't exist at the start of it, will they? Of course they won't. That makes no sense. Somebody's going to feel
it's more likely going to be like
the Force will develop from that.
Yeah, it's more likely going to be like a coven, something like that, like a small group of people who might have, and again, it might have been ostracized, which is why they're kind of gone into hiding. Because they're like, actually, we've been maybe kicked out of different, like communities. Over time, and this is a safe haven. We're out of the prying eyes from the Jedi and just like Republic life. So it's I mean, and obviously this is the risk we're at, and the risk that we do have with a show like Acolyte, which is kind of subverting expectations quite heavily. Is that it's like whether or not we get to that point whereby we're just now subverting stuff, like just for the sake of kind of being a little bit clever, which I guess is one of the big criticisms where, say, like The Last Jedi, was that it was, you can subvert an expectation, but like, do it for a reason. Don't just do it because that's your MO,
That's a perfectly good point, and I very much agree. And a lot of people are sort of equating the Acolyte with The Last Jedi because it's kind of going out on a limb. But I think also what we're seeing from the Jedi at this, and also it's a different era, it's a different time period, attitudes, politics, lots of things are going to have changed. Preeminent things in the sequel and the original trilogy won't be at the top of the bill at this time period. But to think, as you say, that the Jedi will assume that whoever's accessing the Force that isn't them is doing it for evil ends. We're watching a process of how, for example, a youngling is brought into the Order, and it always seemed kind of it was if you look at Phantom Menace, and this is why I'm enjoying it, because it's drilling, it's kind of going out into the weeds a little bit, but it's drilling into stuff that we kind of know. When you think about Phantom Menace, the only reason they went to Tatooine was to fix the hyperdrive. They didn't know they were going to meet Anakin.
No,
that was just fate, wasn't it? Destiny, whatever.
It's just the will of the Force.
It was the will of the Force, and so that progressed as it did. And Qui-Gon taking Anakin was that's all we know, because that's all we saw for years and years. There's probably a lot more formality to how that is done than what we saw in Phantom. That was kind of ad hoc. Qui-Gon's calling back. Good grief! I think I found the chosen one. I don't believe it. It was all very much in the moment. Whereas this felt more organized, more formal, with 4 Jedi turning up. But also, I think they're probably expecting trouble. And when you see Torben go down, when he's obviously being taken, when his eyes go black, and maybe that's what screwed that one eye up, I don't know. But when you see that happen, you realize they're quite wise to be cautious in that sense, because they're prepared to defend themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we still don't know, like, as you kind of say, we still don't know really the process and how people get identified as Force users. It's an odd one, really, isn't it? And I quite like maybe that actually we don't necessarily need a formal way to know. I mean, formal way to test, fine, because of benchmarks, and it gives everybody, the viewer, an idea of actually how strong these people are. But actually, you kind of feel like if these Jedi are out in the galaxy, Matt, their chances are they're going to meet people who are most likely going to be Force sensitive and stuff. And then it's like, what do they do? Is it down to each Jedi? Is that their instruction? It's down to you to kind of do the initial admin, to see if they're going to be like, potential candidates. But they just remember, they can't be too old, they can't be this, they can't be that, and blah, 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 blah. And by the way, they can't do the parents anymore, So, and so therefore, but, and this is the thing that maybe I missed, and it might just be down to necessity, as you said, because, but what was the reason to bring these 2 sisters into, to create them, shall we say? Was it to fulfill some potential prophecy, or was it just, like, as you said, just to propagate the bloodline because they're kind of like, ostracized? So it's really interesting, like what that in itself could mean, and so I'm looking forward to hopefully exploring that a bit more. But like we've kind of said, like, this episode really kind of, I think, nailed down the fact that they're really focusing on this, certain point of view. This Rashomon kind of like way of storytelling, like from Akira Kurosawa, where you see the same story from different perspectives. Because, right at the end, like, May drops off into the abyss, Soul saves Osha, and then they kind of walk out past all these dead bodies. But like,
who killed them? Did the Jedi kill them? Was it May that killed them? Did somebody else kill them?
Or did they kill themselves?
Hi, I'm Duncan Poe, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
That's a great point. Yeah, it could be. Very likely could be, yeah.
I mean, it wasn't until actually I was speaking to a friend of mine, Lindsay, afterwards, and she reminded me that tree, the Bowden tree, the
poison that killed Torben last week.
Killed Torben, and you just go, well, actually, hang on a sec. So maybe they kind of go down that whole cultist thing of like, we're not going to, be captured. We're going to take our own lives and commit suicide. Or because when we cut to it being in the ship, you kind of see like Torben kind of looks a little bit worse aware. I think he started to go about scar and all that already. So it's like we've definitely missed a big chunk of time.
Yes.
So
more flashbacks, I think, coming up.
Gotta be, right? So that, which will be interesting, and it'll be interesting to see if it's going to be from the Jedi's perspective or May's perspective. So, and I think it's just going to open the story even further up. So it's going to be really exciting to see.
It is. It really is. Just one more thing. It couldn't help but strike me as we were watching it that Palpatine has that whole speech in the Opera House in Revenge of the Sith when he tells Anakin about, saving your loved ones and all the powers and stuff that he's learned, and the unnatural abilities quote, which I mentioned earlier. And in Phantom Menace, as we say, Anakin comes along without a father, and we have always assumed or hypothesized, and again, if it's been nailed down in canon, I may have missed it, but I still think the assumption is that Palpatine or Plagueis or somebody was behind it.
Had some hand in it,
definitely some external hands. The Phantom Menace, literally. But I just think that this episode really is going to stand out in retrospect, not just for this season. And I know we're going to go, I don't know, but I feel that we're going to go back into the past again to fill in more gaps. But that this may be the moment where, because Palpatine's not just taking Sith teachings, he's taking Jedi teachings. So now, as we move into the next era of Star Wars, post Rise of Skywalker, let's say, and let's say whenever the film gets made, because it seems to be delayed. But let's say we get to the Rey film, and one of the plot points of the Rey film is a resurgence of these other Force sects, if you like.
Yeah.
So the resurgence of many, if not those new ones. And it's a Force war. It's who has the power to control access, who's going to democratize the Force, who's going to make this, who's going to police it. It's that sort of conflict. And I think when you look back at Palpatine, I don't like talking politics, but it's a bit like, nearly 30 years ago when Tony Blair did New Labour. He took elements of Labour and he took elements of other stuff and he kind of concocted it into this new package and called it Labour, and they won and were in power for however many years, 10, 11 years or whatever it was. So do you know what I'm getting at? It just feels like Palpatine, I'm playing way forward because it is all going to connect, and we'll probably be dead by the time it all actually connects, but it will connect. That he's cherry-picked skills and abilities from different arenas, and this feels like one that he's taken from that coven. So I kind of love that they're like, we can't let this power get out. We can't allow this out in the galaxy. Evil people could use this, but somehow their teachings were written in a book or were somewhere. And you just making that point about Torbin's really on the nose and really spot on. There's a chunk of time we didn't see in this episode. And who's to know what was taken, what was done, who died, who didn't in that moment?
Well, I mean, it's like... It's to that point, isn't it, whereby again, when we look at historically speaking, like the Middle Ages, the rise of Christianity kind of came in, and you had the Crusades, and we're basically going into all these kind of like small kind of European villages and stuff, all these pagan villages, and just wiping stuff out. And then some of that Christianity, the dates like Christmas and stuff like that are born about from pagan dates and stuff, and it's the merging of all these different religions into like one giant super religion. Or in this case, it's basically making sure that Palpatine and the Sith, when they do Jedi, like Order 66 and wipe out the Jedi, they maintain and control what resources are out there, so they've got the advantage. So if Rey does set up there's another group of Force users who just kind of come about, and they go on the HoloNet how to use a Force, there's nothing on there because it's all being kind of controlled. It's all stuff that Palpatine has kept and found useful, he's kept, and then stuff that he hasn't, he's destroyed, therefore wiping it out. So therefore you can get to that point whereby there is only going to be a binary kind of Sith and Jedi kind of situation, until somebody starts to question it, which like you said, might not be this lifetime, but hopefully it will be.
Let's hope. Yeah, that's a very good point. Definitely, there's definitely something in that the Empire tried to create a monoculture essentially, and now you're weirdly looking at the Jedi in relation to the Force, kind of doing the same.
Possibly doing the same thing, yeah. And like I said, it's down to intent, isn't it? It's down to why you do it, and maybe it's policing the galaxy in a proactive way rather than a reactive way. So it's like crime prevention at the galactic level. But I think we've ran our course for today. For this,
we could talk all day about this.
We could talk.
The listeners have got their lives to get on with.
Nobody would want to listen, and nobody would want to watch us for the next couple of hours ramble on.
Visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, Fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely free. So no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
So I think that is all we've got time for this week's episode of Reaction Chat. We will be back with Making Tracks on Tuesday.
Yes, we will.
And then hopefully with the gods and the Force and the threads and the path and everything else aligned, we'll be back for Reaction Chat next Wednesday at some point during the day. So
that's good to me.
Thanks for listening. Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Cannon Fodder.